playing a tank destroyer that has the speed of a light tank slash very fast medium tank, something you don't see every day, and today's gameplay is showcasing the Jagdpanther II or the Jagdpanther II. This is of course the German tier 8 tank destroyer, and it has been such a fun grind to actually play this tank. I really recommend you going towards the Jaeger route, which is of course the Jagdpanzer E100, and this is the tier 8 version on that line, unless you go with the Ferdinand, which I really strongly disrecommend. Don't go with the Ferdinand. Trust me, this tank has got everything the Ferdinand has, but infinitely better. The premise about the Jagdpanther II, or the Jagdpanther II even, is that it has this 490 alpha damage gun. It has the speed of those fast medium tank slash light tank. It has kind of decent armor to a degree, and so yeah, you can have some pretty good rounds in this tank, and you're about to see two fantastic rounds of World of Tanks in this, of course, on console. So how does this tank fare in a matchup where you're coming up against like similar sort of tiers or a tier higher? Well, this tank, because of the high caliber rounds, because of the accuracy, and because of that 490 alpha, can tear holes in pretty much everything that you're coming up against, whether that be tier 8, tier 9, or even tier 10s can really get stung by the Jagdpanther. And you can see here within 2 shots we've managed to pick up 1400 damage, and that's obviously because we managed to set him on fire there. But still, we high rolled both shots, I believe, for 500 plus, meaning that we did a solid 1000 damage before we'd even really done much within the game. And what you can see me doing here is it's so quick for us to move forward with this tank, and that is where I think that a lot of the other tank destroyers kind of limit you as to how you can impact the game, because you can't move up, you can't do what the Jagdpanther II does. And I'm not saying this tank is the best tank destroyer at tier 8, because let's be honest, when you compare it to something like a Scorpion G, it's kind of a very similar, except from the fact that you don't get a turret with this, which is obviously a negative because you're a little less flexible. But it's not the be all and end all. That's something I really want to kind of focus on within this video, is that I'm not trying to recommend the most competitive tanks, because you could name them on probably one hand. There's a few tanks in the game that are like super competitive, and if you wanted to maximize the win rate of your games, you'd be playing only like 3 different tanks, depending on the class, etc. But if you want a tank that really makes you have fun, and because, you know, winning more games doesn't necessarily mean that you have more fun, this tank really does make you have that fun. The key thing, I think, is the speed, and if you decide to run a ramming build with this thing where, you know, you could put on spool liner, now I'm not saying you should, but if you did decide to, and you decided that you wanted to put on other kind of aspects of the tank, where you could deal a little more damage, or you could deal ramming damage, or maybe you want to like kit it out with all of the perks as well, then you might be able to. And that's something I think that could be really beneficial to those of you who fancy like playing a tank like this. Obviously here you're seeing the kind of negatives of the tank is trying to actually hit people whilst you're kind of on the move, but since we know the Barask has fired both and we have pretty low hit points in the tank, means it can be a little bit difficult. Not saying it's super hard or anything like that, because playing the Jagdpanther is not really that hard. But yeah, the flexibility, in a lot of tank destroyers you would not be able to do what we're doing here, chasing down a Barask and being able to just bully him. You can see us moving side to side to just bounce. Unfortunately the Barask manages to kind of hit both sides of the tank whilst it's really well angled, and that is where the Jagdpanther's armor really comes into effect, and how we manage to just remove all of the hit points really of that tank in a pretty quick fashion. And since the reload of the tank is like 7 seconds to be able to do 490, it's really nice, like super quick to dish out that damage. And when you're coming up against like the backer tanks as well, that you'll be seeing in just a second with this 50 TP prototype, you can see like it doesn't take much skill really to be able to have these results and be able to put pressure on opponents and be able to win for your team. I think the limitations of the tank really come down to the fact that you can't, like, in some regards sometimes you might not be able to get the gun depression, or maybe you wouldn't have been able to kind of get that last shot out, or maybe you do get caught off of the reload, and especially when you're stock, when you have the lower alpha gun on this thing where you're dealing like 240 alpha, it can become a little bit of a negative whereby people know you don't particularly have the best armor in the game. And trust me, you don't have the best armor with the Jagdpanther II. I want to get that clear with you guys. You aren't going to be able to bounce too many rounds with this thing. But yeah, the thing is like, as you see in this game, we've blocked 1200 damage, which is by no means terrible for a tank destroyer. That's more than the hit points of our vehicle. Will it happen every game? Probably not, especially if you're in a 2 tiers up in a tier 10 game, for example. But what we've done is dished out 4,500 damage, and that's the kind of the key of this tank, is that yes, you may take quite a few hits, and yes, you may not have the best armor, but when you're consistently hitting your opponents for, and I mean accuracy wise as well, for 490 damage per shot, it really becomes like no competition at that point, because no one's going to be able to just dish out that damage as quick as you probably will be able to, and that's where I really enjoy this sort of tank and this sort of playstyle really, and especially when people think that this is going to be like a terrible tank, or a tank that is kind of an underdog within the game, let's say comparatively to something like a Scorpion G or the SU-130 PM or some of the other tier 8 tank destroyers within the game. I think that's good to have this variety, and I certainly enjoy playing tanks like this, and when you can just roll up on dragons and take them out of the game, it's even better. And of course that is the end of this replay. We've got one more for you, and hopefully we can showcase what the tank can do in a little bit more of a different matchup and a different playstyle, and how you can use it more effectively, and talk more in depth as to how you can have good results in tank destroyers like this. Doesn't particularly have to be the Jagdpanther II, but you can see we picked up 4,983 damage, 1200 blocked, really good game, mastery badge of course, high caliber, etc. for that result. Let's move into the next one. Seems like it's a desert theme for today's video, because we're jumping onto Sand River of course, and this one is a tier 10 game, so we are the bottom, the worst matchup you could possibly be within the game. I don't know if we check what the team deployment is like in a second, but ultimately I believe that we're like one of the very few tier 8s within the game. It's not like a couple of tier 10s and the rest are tier 8s, but what you can see with this tank is because we're fairly rapid, we can get into position pretty early on. We're going to try and take a early spot, but the key thing on Sand River is that you don't lose your health early. Losing your health early on Sand River is, well, on any map really, is terrible, but especially on Sand River, because you need that hit points at the end of the game, and if you can keep them and you can use them later on, you can have some really amazing results, especially if you use like the mobility of your tank to really help you out. And the relocation like ability on this map is insane really, and that's what makes it completely different to someone playing on, I don't know, for example Hailbron or something like that, where relocation can happen but it's not as effective. This map really does have kind of the effective mobility that you can use to kind of surprise your opponents and just change it up and make sure that you're consistently dealing damage. Obviously, one thing I want to note, in a tier 10 game, don't be a super aggressive Jagdpanther II, because you're going to lose all your hit points very quickly. Your armor doesn't work at tier 10, like flat out just won't work. I mean, to a degree you might be able to bounce a few rounds if you're super well angled, but for the most part you're not going to, and especially if artillery's aiming at you and they're going for you, then it really doesn't work. And unfortunately it's a batch at 58, so you see me kind of moving forward, just trying to avoid maybe a potential second shot coming in. Which is definitely the case. It could potentially come in, and we want to make sure that we're not getting spotted, and of course we do get spotted in that regard. We see the batch at 58 actually fired there and missed, well, missed one of our teammates. He's not aiming directly at us, but that could all change depending on what the artillery's doing, so we're going to keep on kind of swapping, changing, just trying to avoid that sort of shot within this position. But talking about this position, this is an amazing position for this kind of setup where the enemy team have kind of taken the dunes, and we can get into this sort of area to just put pressure on anyone that might be moving through there, and it just kind of supports our teammates down in the dip if anyone decides to think that they're really good and try and crest those ridge lines, tries to get up into the sort of positions around here. And what you'll see me doing, we're taking like the super aggressive position now. This is kind of where you go when you want to have like a really like decent game. and you can get undetected. As you can see here, we managed to get undetected. Now, in this sort of scenario, it's not particularly the greatest because we have an E75 sat in front of us who could potentially hit us, and we of course had that light tank that decided that he's coming down. So we made the executive decision, we're going to drop down and we're going to try and get ourselves out of that sort of position. But what can we do from this position? 900 damage, that is pretty terrible for this kind of stage in the game. A lot of people have lost their hit points already, and so we have to maintain a little bit of caution with the game. We've only got 1100 hit points, remember. That's one of the lowest for the TDs in the game. I think even the Borsig has a similar sort of level, and that's a paper tank, so be careful with how many hits you're taking. You can essentially take 3 hits from pretty much any tank, or any heavy tank within the game, and certainly if you're taking tank destroyer hits, they could high roll you very easily within 2 shots, so be very warned, or be warned, this tank does not take hits very well at all. And so although you may want to be like a super heavy aggressive tank, maybe it is better to wait a couple minutes into the game before you decide to do that, and YOLO into someone using that really amazing mobility. Doesn't matter though, because we shut down the enemy ISU 152K, which is of course the brand new tier 8 Soviet tank that came into the game. This one is free for those of you who are wondering. Obviously it's a tech tree tank, I don't know that I mentioned that actually. Yeah, you will be able to get this for free, which is obviously what everyone wants. You want to always play a free tank if possible, and that's definitely something that the Jagdpanther does. And with most free tanks, they're usually terrible, but with this tank, it's not. It's actually a good one, and so you kind of have to put that into your brain. Maybe this one is worth it for you. Maybe you're interested in playing these high alpha German TDs that actually have a bit of mobility, unless you're talking about the Jagdpanzer E100, which is not so much. But regardless of what the Jagdpanzer E100 is like, the tier 10 version of this, what you'll see me doing here is just putting rounds into someone that's decided that they're just going to YOLO in for some reason. Don't quite know why the WZ here, Quillin, decided that he's going to go all in against our teammates, but we'll quite happily take advantage of that and put 2 rounds straight into him. Have to be very careful with the artillery because he did hit us once for 400 damage and we don't want that anymore. And because we have the mobility, as we've been bashing out within this video, you can run. You can run in the Jagdpanther II. And with most tank destroyers, you can't run. And it's not even the fact that the tank is fast in and of itself. You've also got like the turning speed, so you can kind of actually move and not be just a blob or a block of just pure boringness where you basically have to turn for 10 years and then you can become fast. It's actually quick to turn, which means when people actually come and try and get around you, 9 times out of 10 they can't, because your speed is just that quick, which makes it really fun when it comes down to actually progressing within the game and catching people off guard, which people really hate, obviously, as you can imagine, when you start turning around and just laying into them with these 490 alpha damage hits. And unfortunately for the IS-3, he's about to find out what 490 hit points can do against 390 of his hit points, and yeah, taken out very quickly. Batch at 155.58 manages to take out our Scorpion G, which I thought was funny. Well, not funny for the Scorpion G, but yeah, it's always funny when artillery decides they're gonna be OP and just shotgun people. So yeah, I guess I've done that many a time. But anyway, regardless of what the artillery's done in this game, of course we have to be a little bit careful, because 5 to 3, you know, 2 tanks can take out 4, it is possible, so we don't want to throw ourselves away. And when the Type 5, if he manages to get like just an inch of us, he could definitely take us out. But sweet revenge for the Scorpion G, the other German tier 8 tank destroyer. We pick up the batch at 155.58, which was really nice. Obviously what we don't want to do is get caught out by the Type 5 heavy, who we're not going to mess around with, because from that angle we can probably pen the lower plate of the Jagdpanther II, which would be disastrous. And what we're going to do now, just do a little swing by the Mao, see if we can get a shot on him. Unfortunately we can't, but regardless, let's take a swing back towards the Type 5 here. And by this point I'm hoping that the Type 5 will then engage our tanks, which he does, and so we can just mop up the last remaining hit points of his tank. We'll put 1 into him with an AP round there. and hopefully he'll turn towards our team, and then we can come over again and potentially get the final shot off on him. Can we? Yes, we can. 399 hit points secured and 4,176 damage done in this tier 10 result. You'll see exactly how you can fare within these tier 10 games. You can't be super aggressive like you can on the tier 8 games, but you can be competitive against those tier 10s because of the penetration, because of the alpha damage. You can outtrade a lot of the heavy tanks at this tier, and definitely any of the medium tanks, albeit unless they have like super high alpha with Hesh or something like the British Hesh rounds. But there we go, 4,176 damage, 4 enemies destroyed, 700 assistance in a tier 10 game. Mastery badge, great result. Hopefully this showcases what the Jagdpanther II can do within the game. If you want to check out any other tank destroyers within the game, I will link a playlist for the gameplay and tank reviews that cover loads of different tanks, albeit whether they're mediums, heavies, etc. But you can gloss through that playlist, find out all about different tanks within the game, and I really recommend you do that if you're wanting to learn the game, learn the maps, etc. It's really, really helpful to look through those gameplays, and it of course helps out the channel. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll see me in the next one. Goodbye.